All right, everybody, and today we will be talking to Marie, who is joining us now. Hi, Marie.
Hi.
How are you going today?
Very well. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
You're very welcome. Yeah, you're in Melbourne, aren't you?
Yes,
Yes.
based in Melbourne.
Yeah.
That's it.
Beautiful.
So it is grand final weekend.
It is.
There's a day off tomorrow. Are you supporting anyone?
You know what? Because there isn't a Melbourne team and my team didn't even make the finals, but I actually have a soft spot for the Lions. I think I'm going to go for them. Why not? Oh, really? You too? Oh, good.
Lions girl, Rob's Carlton, so
Yeah.
also happy with that.
Oh,
That happy
good.
to have a win. There's a bit of a Horsham connection there as well, which is cool.
There is to Sydney too, but
Yeah.
Oh, have you got players from Horsham in the teams?
Yeah. Well, I think there's really one in each.
Yeah. One in each.
Jared Berry in the Lions is a Horsham lad, and Lloydie, Jake Lloyd, has played at Sydney for ever,
Yeah.
and I think this is his fourth grand final, and he's lost 3 so far. So either way,
we'll
it's
be happy with both, but I'm
Yeah.
definitely Lions through and through.
Yeah,
fantastic.
be a good game.
It'll be amazing. Marie, do you want to give a bit of background of yourself before we kick off into the great area of investing for grandkids and education bonds?
Sure thing. So I'm a BDM for Futurity. We do the education bonds, as you know, but previous to that, I was a life insurance BDM for many years. And that was kind of my start to the financial services industry. I really enjoyed working in that space because I was solving problems around education costs as well. We were building that into the sums insured, but a focus on the life insurance strategies was that intergenerational wealth transfer, which I found really interesting. But when I came into the education bond space, that intergenerational wealth transfer just came to a whole new level, and that's where we started solving some really interesting problems. So have been in financial services for about 15 years now. And I love working with financial advisors and solving problems for their clients through really good strategies, which that's where I'm in now. And it's even beyond education funding. It's definitely estate planning, asset protection. And so I find that really interesting. But about myself, I'm a Kiwi, so I've been in Australia almost 15 years, and that's why it's taken a while to embrace AFL. But I do love sports in general, and I spend most weekends watching and playing sports, and currently thinking about coaching actually. So I do enjoy basketball. Is probably my favourite sport.
Yeah.
And
Fantastic.
What about me?
And you mentioned advisors or slash clients' problems. I'd be interested to know what's the 80% of the problems? There's only be a handful of problems that take up most of your time. What are those?
Interestingly, we're seeing a common theme being around family conflict, which is an area where some advisors do find a bit complicated, but our strategies can actually really help in that space. So whether it's grandparents worrying about their adult child going through a divorce and that money they want to put aside for them and their grandchildren getting caught up in that's a problem that we can solve for. Or parents that get divorced and have an education bond in place, how you can navigate that. Or even sibling rivalry within a family, even in that multi-generational farming family scenarios. We do feel that our strategies can really help navigate those family conflict scenarios very well, and I can share a little bit more about that, but that's kind of an emerging one that comes up. Asset protection is also very important, and the features in our education bonds can really solve for that as well, making sure that the money that they put aside for the next generation doesn't get caught up in any kind of other disputes in the family and then end up not going to where they want it to go. So that's probably a big area for us.
Yeah, and I think for us in our office, the increase in the market values we've seen in the past 12, 24 months means that grandparents are looking to capitalise on some of those awesome returns that they're seeing, but then thinking, well, yeah, the kids will automatically get some of this as part of the estate, but they really are wanting to leave it to the grandchildren directly, and especially because the housing prices around the country are astronomical. it's really in a hope that it will just help them mainly with the housing industry a lot, but as well the education benefits are just so compelling.
Yeah. And Marie, you're mentioning the education bond, and whilst it's sort of called that, it has far more reaching applications than just that education. It's more of a, are we calling it the right thing, calling it education bond?
That's a very good point, Robert. So the education bond is essentially an investment bond with extra tax benefits when you use it for education. So it could make, a little sense to potentially change that name into more of a life event bond, because we can fund for other life events other than education, such as a future home deposit or estate planning. But just to honour that special 30% education tax benefit that we get from the Australian Tax Office, we do need to just keep that name education bond, but it's on us and on advisors to educate that it's so much more than that.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. It's it can look a little bit more limiting than the strategy suggests. It's a lot more flexible, a lot more broader than just funding education. Great. Despite being called an education bond.
Yes. Yep. So you better follow on and explain the understanding, or explain the tax benefit of it actually being called an education bond rather than just an investment bond. And that's probably an area that I'm not overly aware of myself, so interested to know.
Yes, it is a unique education tax benefit that we offer. So essentially, when your clients invest into an education bond, Futurity will pay the tax on their behalf on the earnings that generate from the education bond, and then when it's drawn down, the earnings is drawn down to fund education expenses, then Futurity will refund the tax that they paid on that expense. So for instance, your clients put in 100 grand in an education bond, it generates 10 grand of earnings, they take 10 grand out to use for an education expense, Futurity will credit 30% of that 10 grand, so we'll pop 3 grand back into the earnings balance. So you're actually getting money back when you use it to spend it on education. And that's something we're very proud of, and that it's unique to an education bond. Hence, we just need to retain that name. Yeah. But it does everything an investment bond does, but more.
Right. And so some of it can be used for education, but some might be used for different purposes.
Correct.
And then you guys just treat it a little bit differently based on what the money's used for?
Yes, so when you make a withdrawal from an education bond, you do need to declare whether it's for education expenses or not. If it's not, then you've got the option to take it out from the capital component. So that 100 grand I mentioned earlier, that 100 grand is available to the client anytime, any purpose, no tax consequences. So that's another unique, valuable benefit we can offer, is that access to capital tax-free, and it doesn't have to be used for education. If you want to access the earnings for non-education purposes, then the normal investment bond rules apply, and it's best to wait till the 11th year to access earnings for non-education, but you can access earnings for education within 10 years tax-free, and then capital within 10 years tax-free.
Yeah. And this withdrawal for education purposes is really quite a broad, education purposes can mean many things, such as uni costs, schooling fees, even transport to and from school, as well as accommodation for schooling. So it really is a great range of benefits to have that 30%.
Thanks for that, Amy. And that will cover that. So yes, there is more to education expenses than the fees. Yeah. And we find that ancillaries really add up over time. And from prep to year 12 for an independent school, the national average is about 317 grand, and that includes all the ancillaries, the uniforms, textbooks, laptops, camps, sporting, musical lessons, all of that. Yeah. You can claim from the education bond as well as university.
Yeah. Yeah. And Futurity, so you guys who run the bonds, you've got the ability to cherry pick, so say it's not education, we'll take it from the capital side, but if it is, we'll cherry pick and take it from that's very clever.
That is, yes. Yeah. Only bond that allows you to elect where you take money from.
Yeah.
That's it.
Beautiful. I did some of these numbers for a client scenario that we had in-house, and I got your help on doing that, and it was really amazing to see at the end of the day. The scenario was a 13 or 17 year bond, and I love that you guys do compare it to managed funds and also just an investment bond at the end of the day, and what the difference in balance is, in accumulated balance over the lifetime of the bond. I did it for a $200,000 bond, and I only did 3 years of withdrawals for education purposes up to that $18,200 tax-free threshold that an over 18-year-old would have. And the difference at the end of it was $246,000 in the education bond compared to $198,000 in an investment bond. So it's massive numbers that you guys...
Like 50 grand.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's it. If you don't make any education claims from an education bond, then the result will be the same as an investment bond.
Yes,
So
it really is that gross up that you guys credit back in.
Yep.
Makes all the difference.
Yep. And managed fund scenario that you put in as well, Amy, that was at a marginal tax rate.
Yep. And all fees and management fees, investment fees, the same.
Right. Yep.
yes, assuming that, yes.
And it's also great with your education bonds that, you know, they are quite similar to an investment bond. There's so many investment options that you can choose from in there, from the active, you know, higher cost managers through to those low cost, you know, everyone knows the Vanguard ones at 0.08%. So it's quite, amazing the range you guys offer.
Thank you. Yes, we'd like to give clients choice, and there's always the intention that we'll expand the menu, but we definitely have a good range to choose from now.
Go, Amy.
I was going to say another reason we did bring up education bonds with our client was because they wanted to specifically gift to the grandchildren. So if you could talk a little bit around the estate planning flexibility and I guess the non-willable asset side of these education bonds.
Yes, thank you. So with our education bonds come a range of very handy estate planning features that make transferring wealth to the next generation smooth, certain, and tax-free. So for instance, if you want to have an asset outside of the will, you can make the education bond a non-estate asset. And what that means is that if your will has other investments in there that may be at risk of being challenged by other family members, you can protect that bond by having it outside of your will. And that way, if they do challenge the estate, the bond won't form part of that challenge. And you can do that of one or two ways. You can nominate a bond estate nominee, which is like a death beneficiary on a super fund. You can do the same with a bond. So what happens there is if the bond owner passes away, the proceeds of the bond can go straight to that bond estate nominee, bypassing probate and not being at risk of being challenged, and that can go tax-free to the intended recipient upon death of the bond owner. Or if the bond owner wants that bond to carry on after they've passed away and be released to the grandchild at a future date, say their 25th birthday, then they can have a future activated transfer nominated on that bond. So you're attaching a future owner. So that future owner will inherit that bond at a certain date that the bond owner specifies. It could be on their death or it could be on their grandchild's birthday. And that will be tax-free. So that's the beauty of our bond. It's tax-free on the death of the bond owner, and it's also tax-free on transfer of ownership, which you don't get with a lot of other assets. So that's a part of that estate planning, is that you can make it sit outside the will. You can also nominate a bond guardian, and that's quite valuable too. So that's a unique feature that we can offer, is that the bond owner can nominate someone else that they trust to be the bond guardian, and then they take over managing that bond after the bond owner dies, and maybe the grandchild's still very young. That bond guardian can make withdrawals on behalf of the bond owner after they've passed until the grandchild's old enough to own that bond. So bond guardian's another handy tool that's much like a trustee on a testamentary trust or a power of attorney. So that's another feature we can offer. And then, yes, the future activated transfer, so making sure that you can choose when that person gets that bond. And for instance, with superannuation, when the super fund member passes away, they can't control when the death beneficiaries receive that money. It just gets paid straight to them. And there might be tax consequences too, because if they're non-tax dependents, they may have to pay up to 17% tax. But with a bond, you can control when they get it after you've passed away, and then you can also have that transfer tax-free as well.
Yeah. I think that was a really great real life example that we did use for a client in office. Being, that our main client wanted to leave a lump sum of money to the grandchild.
Yes.
Didn't want it to go to the parent, and there were multiple grandchildren, and they also wanted, if one of those grandchildren did pass away, that money would be left to the other grandchild.
Yeah,
To,
we did do that. That worked quite well.
yeah, and we
Yes.
actually could utilise both the bond guardian and that future activated transfer date, so the kids could receive the money at 28 years of age, and if the bond owners passed away before that, the bond guardian can administer any aspect of that bond, but can also
Yes.
set in place some really awesome rules to say, limits on what the withdrawals each year might be, which is, I just thought that
Yes.
was amazing as well.
Thanks for mentioning that. If the bond owners want to really control it, they can leave Futurity a list of instructions for us to enforce on the bond guardian. So that the bond owner might say, I just want 20 grand a year for education only. I want Futurity to check the receipts. We can do that. By default, we don't check the receipts for education expenses, but if the bond owner wants us to, we can on their behalf.
Marie, what happens if you've got a future date where the kids are currently 10, 11 now, and it's 28 when they're deemed to be old enough and respectful enough, to get the money, which is what a lot of our clients are considering and doing. What if there is no bond guarding? And the grandparents pass away? Where does the flow of paperwork go, and how does the ownership and the structural side of it change if there is no bond guardian to step in once the owners are gone?
Good question. So if there is no bond guardian nominated, then the legal personal representative or the trustee on the estate can step in and manage that bond without a bond guardian. So it's not locked away and untouchable. We can allow for whoever's the administrator on the estate to step in and take over that bond as if it was part of the will anyway. So unless there is a future activated transfer and a bond estate nominee nominated with specific instructions, we would allow someone else to manage that bond without the bond guardian being nominated. But if the bond guardian is nominated, they have complete jurisdiction on that bond, and then it would override anyone outside the bond.
Right, and even the wishes of the previous owners that passed away. If the owners set in some rules that you mentioned earlier, the bond guardian would have to stick
Abide.
to this, and
Yes.
you guys, being, I suppose, a custodial of some of the money, would say, well, no, you can't do that. This is what your parents wanted.
Correct. We would honour the instructions left behind by the bond owner.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I suppose the real life scenario there is grandparents, and then probably the child, their child, and the parents of the grandchildren is going to be that bond guardian normally.
correct. And just to add to that, if the adult child is the bond guardian, and there's also another role, it's a bond representative, which is co-managing the bond when the bond owner's alive. When the bond owner passes away, then the bond guardian activates. So the adult child can be the bond representative and the bond guardian, just not at the same time. And that way they've got some access and control to the bond without owning it. So if anything happens to them, if they risk divorce, getting sued or bankrupt or anything like that, that bond is protected away from whatever happens with the adult child. But they can still participate and have something to do with the bond, they just don't technically own it. So that's another way of protecting that,
Right.
but including them at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a big consideration for the parents with, large estates to pass on to their kids, is when they do have that tricky relationship with their spouse and they want to protect those assets from potential divorce. So it's
Correct.
worthwhile.
That's it.
And obviously we're not sacrificing, investment returns, asset allocation, or the way that people may have preferences to invest their money.
Yes. So they can choose from our range of options on our menu, and they can switch along the way too. There's no CGT for switching investment options, but if the strategy changes and they want to take advantage of the markets going well, or if they want to be more conservative, they can definitely change
Yeah, and I think
what they invest in.
yeah, we're progressively investing for our clients, so we've done 25% into the growth investment option, 75 just still in the cash, and we'll just progressively go in with the market. So
Right.
it's great flexibility.
Yeah, and after say 10 years, you mentioned obviously there's no capital gains. It's the capital gains that is that's achieved over the time. Is that progressively taxed at the bond tax rate?
Correct. That's it. So how we pay tax is that Futurity will pay tax at starting at their company tax rate of 30%. Often it's less than that, depending on the investment option. We can apply franking credits and other offsets to get that tax rate lower to even towards the 20%, even lower mark, depending on the investment option. So all the earnings will be taxed at that tax rate. The effective tax rate is usually between 20 to 25%. And so Futurity will internally tax the earnings at that effective tax rate. That includes dealing with the capital gains internally. So there's no CGT event for your client, but that's all managed within that effective tax rate. We will pay and provide for unrealised gains as well along the way. So a little bit different to investing in your own name. You're investing at potentially our company tax rate or even lower than that. And then we take care of any little CGT events along the way. We just pay as we go.
Yeah. Will these investment bonds benefit from the new company tax rate of down to 25% that is available for some areas, or is that just the laws around the investment bonds don't change? It's still 30%.
Our company tax rate is 30% because our turnover is more than 50 mil a year, so it doesn't benefit from the 25% small company tax rate. We'll always be at our company tax rate, and if that ever changes, then it'll change with that. But thankfully, in most cases, we do pay in that 20 to 25% mark most of the time.
So for example, if you invest into the Imputation Fund, so you're in the old colonial first state, which Amy probably hasn't used, it was the staple back in the day, colonial first state Imputation Fund. So if you had all your money just in that fund, Marie, what would the tax rate come down to? Where
if it's fully franked, all that. I mean, for some of our, say, Australian shares funds, if we've got ones that are heavily, just all that, probably more like 20%.
Great.
Effective tax rate. We do build in the provision for unrealised gains in our effective tax rate. So some bond providers might talk about the tax that they pay, but the effective tax rate includes the provision for unrealised gains, and that is what impacts the investor. That's what coming out of the unit price on a daily basis is that paid and provision for tax. So around I mean, one of our funds is 18% effective tax rate, so it would be closer to 20% for sure than 30 for a fund like that.
Thank you.
And so that 30% tax credit on earnings for education withdrawals only, that really comes into play from the ATO, because you've paid that 30% tax along the way, but then they give,
refund,
I guess, that 30% back for education, for Australia's future.
Correct.
What's the process like for clients to actually make that withdrawal? And you mentioned earlier that you don't physically check receipts, but is there, any duty on bond owners to retain receipts and provide those to anybody at any stage?
Yes, we don't check the receipts, but we always recommend that the bond owners hang on to those receipts in case they ever, in the unlikely event, but if they ever get audited by the ATO.
Yeah.
Because that credit comes from them, we just pass it on to your client, then they would be responsible to the ATO to provide that proof of education expense if the day ever comes. So we do recommend, hang on to those receipts. You can even back claim some of those expenses as well. I forgot to mention that, but if you don't have, say, enough receipts in 1 year, but then you want to claim some of the older expenses later, you can do that. You can back claim. But like I said, those receipts are for them to hang on to in case the ATO comes along. Yeah.
And is that request for withdrawal an easy process? Or I just can hear some clients saying, oh, it just all sounds a little bit too hard if I've got to then ask a third party for a withdrawal, or
Sure. We try and make the whole withdrawal process so smooth, that's why we don't ask for the receipts. But if they do want to make a claim, then they can go online on their client portal and select withdrawals, and then we will prompt them, is this for education, is this for non-education, where do you want to take it from, capital or earnings? It's quite well guided. And then we've got a physical form that they can complete and email to our investor care team. So you've got the two options. You can make a withdrawal through your client portal, or you can maybe do it on their behalf through your advisor portal, or they can fill out a manual form and we'll process it that way. So it's straightforward, and we've got a great investor care team that can help as well.
And if a client does nominate the bond representative, so for clients of consortium, we are the bond representatives, so we can do those processes.
Yes, on their behalf.
Yeah. And
that's true.
Bond representative, that agreement is automatically cancelled on the passing of the bond owner, and then
correct.
The bond guardian can only step into place after that.
That's it. That's correct. Yes.
Marie, I'm hung up on the obviously the separating of earnings and capital. I'm just wondering, is that, that sounds like obviously systems and the way your back office systems and software is built. Is that unique to you guys, or does everyone have that flexibility in the marketplace that provide education bonds?
That's unique to an education bond. There are a couple of other education bond providers, so it's definitely not unique to Futurity, but it's unique to education bonds in general. Okay. But the investment bond, like as for instance, that those two balances are combined and you can't elect, but with us we separate. So when your clients log on and when you log on to look at their balances, you'll see capital and earnings are separate, and then you get the total bond balance, which is obviously 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah. So that's how transparent it is, and that makes it easier to work out where you want to take money from, because there's different components to choose from.
So really, for anyone that deliberately puts money aside for children for education purposes, doing it outside in their individual names where they're going to be taxed, it makes 0 sense by comparison. And Amy's numbers here, which obviously it isn't.
I've got those. Yep.
Yeah, it just is just so much money.
Daylight between the options and
because you're getting your tax back. So if people are thinking about doing this, it's an absolute no-brainer. And then
that's it.
And then depending on the timelines, how old are the children, when might they need this money, then you can also get a decent return by selecting the right asset allocation.
Yes.
And I think the tax-free transfer is also a really compelling option. If a client was to invest in their own name, for them to transfer direct shares or even managed funds, that's a capital gains tax trigger. So that's transferring all of those across at the time, as opposed to this. So why not?
So best still have the growth and get the
30% refund on education expenses.
But essentially pay no tax.
Yeah.
On education purposes. Yeah. You've paid your tax to be able to put the money in to start with. So we've all paid our dues, but it's once it's in there. Yep.
Yes.
Cool.
And the great thing is that because it's so flexible and people's journeys might change, maybe the children don't go to university, or they might want to use the money for a home deposit, it can bend and flex to wherever life takes you. So at the end of the day, there's no compulsion to make education claims, but if you do, you'll get a reward for it. So it is that flexible.
Thought of a question.
Go on.
Where does Hex and help debts come into this?
Yes, that's a good question. So we do cover Hex Debt. So even if the Hex Debt's been there before the bond, then we can still use the bond to pay down that Hex Debt and get the 30% credit.
Wow.
So that can work for even parents that have Hex Debt. They can use it for that. And education's lifelong. So if you decide to go back to study, or if any of your clients want to study for their professional development or just enrichment, we can cover adult learning as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm 52 and finished my catch-up study about 2 years ago. So.
When we still have 40 hours of professional development to do every year, that we have to drive to Melbourne every time. That's an education expense, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's it. So yeah, it's never ending.
It is.
Yeah. So just switching, obviously, the education side of it, I've learned a bit for this, so thank you, Marie. But when it comes to, I suppose, wills being contested, and how can these bonds provide certainty for people where there is uncertainty in the family dynamic?
Yes. So the certainty there is to make sure it's structured in the correct way. So to make sure that there is a bond estate nominee nominated or a future owner nominated, these bonds will become a non-estate asset. So some people might think, these bonds aren't going to be contested just on their own. You need to structure it in that way. By default, it is an estate asset unless you add one of those two options on, or both. In Amy's client's case, we actually had both of those options. So it is covered, it is protected under estate law, and in the time that we've had these bonds in place, there's not been an issue with any challenges. These bonds also don't have a TFN, they're not going to be in the will, they do fly under the radar in that respect too, so they're quite discreet. But if people do find out about them, as long as those two options are on there, or one of those two, they can't do anything about it.
Well,
that was another, I guess, big plus of the education bonds, is the identification and tax file number is really just for the bond owners at the time, and we don't need to identify then the grandchildren and apply them tax file numbers and do all of that stuff that we generally do for direct shareholdings or anything like that. So it is quite great up front.
That's it. It's very tidy tax reporting. As long as you make those withdrawals tax-free, then it won't show up on the tax return. So it is a tidy way to manage that from a tax reporting point of view.
Beautiful.
What other applications have you seen used where it's been very clever and it's helped out in some particular way? Do you have an interesting case study?
Sure. So apart from those core strategies, so education funding and estate planning and asset protection, it does come in handy when it comes to even any clients that are living overseas or studying or working overseas, or non-tax residents living in Australia. So Futurity is not bound to report the income to any global tax authorities. So under the scholarship fund, under the Income Tax Assessment Act, scholarship funds are excluded from global tax reporting requirements. So our bonds do end up acting like a natural tax shelter for those that are non-tax residents of Australia. So that's probably an unexpected kind of area that we can help, those that might just want to have that asset in Australia and not needing to have to report that to the States or Europe. So we don't report, so there's that area that we can help. But also adult learning, so that's kind of come in a bit more. So we've got professionals that take out these bonds for themselves, they've got no children yet, but that helps fund like doctors, nurses, pilots, their courses, their fees. We've had vets, we've got even financial advisors, professionals that just do ongoing study. They use these bonds to fund that, and then when they do have families and children can be added at a later point. So we don't need an education beneficiary to start a bond, but often these clients are putting themselves as education beneficiaries, and they're on high marginal tax rates, so they're going to definitely benefit from a tax-paid investment like a bond.
Right. So you can nearly have one bond, and as long as you've got the beneficiaries, or say for myself, my children, my future grandchildren, they can all, we can pay for our education out of that one account. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. We can have multiple beneficiaries on our family education bond, and that is unique to Futurity. So the other two education bond providers do not have that trust-like multi-beneficiary structure. So you can have as many beneficiaries as you want. So you can have the whole family on there.
So, and as new family members emerge,
yes,
you can add?
you can add. It doesn't reset anything. You just add as you go. And sometimes we have hopeful grandparents that come along without the grandchildren yet.
Yep.
They just want to get ready for them when they arrive, and they set up an education bond, and then once they start being born, they can add them at that point. So very flexible from that point of view.
That's really cool. I like that.
And
Yeah.
probably worth re-mentioning that, as you mentioned, if you are on a higher marginal tax rate as a bond owner, the more compelling these bond structures or education bonds become, because it is that fixed 30% or less, as opposed to marginal tax rates.
Yeah, 30% or zero if it's for education.
Yeah.
Yeah, rebate coming.
That's true. For education, it's zero.
Wow, I've learned a lot. That's been good.
You have. That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
Clients are learning too.
Yeah, fantastic.
Oh, that's good.
Any other questions?
I think you've absolutely summarised it beautifully. Thank you very, very much for meeting with us, Marie.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, and I appreciate your support so far. And yeah, happy to help future strategies.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Definitely.
If any clients are listening and want to see if this is right for them, definitely get in touch with us, and I will reach out to Marie if I don't know, and I'm sure she'll be able to come up with a strategy to make sure the funds need to go where you want them to.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you,
good.
Marie.
Did have a interesting case where a client did see their financial advisor. It was a divorced parent, and they were saying that their ex-spouse was not working on purpose to maximise their child support entitlements, and what can I do to not contribute to their lifestyle. And so the advisor recommended a Futurity education bond because firstly, that divorced parent was on a high marginal tax rate, so they were going to benefit from a tax-paid investment. And also, our bonds don't have that TFN, and they don't automatically distribute income. It retains the income, Futurity pays a tax on that income. Obviously, the capital is available for that parent to access for them and the children. So there's not much you can do about employment income, but when it comes to investment income, going into an education bond, it doesn't appear on the tax return and then further add to the income to then be assessed for child support entitlements. And so that solved that problem in a interesting way. And so I keep that one up my sleeve because I don't want to, it just doesn't sound like, I don't know. I think it's interesting, and it's a real life case. So feel free to use that.
It's interesting. It's relevant, and as I said, you can't unless you're self-employed.
Yes, he wasn't.
And you've got trusts and the like. But if you're an employee with a wage, there's nothing you can do. There's no manipulation there, and pay.
Correct.
And please pay your dues.
Yes, and this parent was all about that. It was just something that just irked them, and then this gave them a bit of comfort, going, okay, well I can pay what I have to pay, but this investment income is for myself and the children.
Yep.
And that's what it was. That was what it was all about. So you can hopefully carve that and put that in there, but I just always keep it at the end in case it doesn't sound great, but I think it's a good one. It works for all parents.
It's brilliant. It's all for the benefit of the children, and that's ethically what they're like at the end of the day.
Yes, that's it. Okay, well, thank you so much. I love doing this kind of thing. It's always very exciting.
Cool.
And I look forward to, how long does it normally take for it to upload?
Probably a couple of weeks.
We've got
We've got a few.
We've had some banked up for a little bit, and we just send them to our editor all at once, so they will get through it.
And we just we did had a chat with Peter Thornhill this morning. Have you seen Peter at all?
No.
I'll get Amy to send you a link once it's done. But because he's he's our mentor in terms of our
okay, I'll have to look him up.
And it's the best story out there, Marie, in terms of where to invest and why.
Motivated money. Okay, I just looked him up.
Well, there's plenty of stuff out there from Peter. He's been educating since 2000, and I got exposed to him at a conference in 2001. So our investment strategy is really centre around Peter's work.
That's great.
It's the best.
I'll look into him.
The best story in our industry, Marie, as to where to invest and why. So
Thank you.
where I was getting to was that is we've got a couple of phones recording as well, just to up the quality and the production values. So you get the same as well.
Thank you. I can't wait. Okay. Well, I'll look out for that. But thanks again.
Have a great weekend.
You too. You too. Go Lions.
Enjoy the atmosphere of Melbourne and all the footy fans running around.
Yeah, that is fun.
I'll be
Yeah.
I'll be near the American Donuts at Vic Market, and I'll be at the G.
Oh, you're coming to Melbourne for it?
I was very lucky. My mum and dad put myself and brother and sister as members when we were very young. And I've been a full member for probably 8 years now. So I get to see Katy Perry. That's
cool.
It is very.
Rules like a lion. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, she does too. So I get to go. I've been going to the grand final, apart from the ones that weren't here for COVID. So it's a great day.
Pleased for you. Have fun. That's going to be great.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right,
Awesome.
We'll stay in touch then.
See you, Marie.
Take care.
Thank you for your help. Bye-bye.
Bye.